What are we covering in the last 24 hours on the Israel-Hamas war? The Israeli War Cabinet decided that Hamas's counteroffer is a non-starter and there's no point in negotiating it. The IDF today entered the Al-Amal hospital in the western parts of the city. The commanders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, located in the Deir ez-Zor area, were poisoned in the last 24 hours. A substantial barrage of 40 rockets sent from Lebanon towards the Golan Heights, targeting the IDF base in the area. Hello. I am Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here to bring you the summary of the last 24 hours on the Israel-Hamas war. It is currently the evening of February 9th, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 10th, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, Qatar informed Israel and France today that Hamas gave assurances that the hostages that are held by Hamas were given the medicines supplied to them during the medical deal in the middle of January. According to that deal, Israel would supply medicines that the hostages who have chronic illnesses require, and in turn Hamas would give proof that the hostages actually received the medicines. Israel would in turn allow an increased medical supplies to enter the Gaza Strip. Israel held up its end of the deal and supplied those medical supplies. Hamas reportedly did give the medicines to the hostages, however no proof was ever supplied, despite Prime Minister Netanyahu personally guaranteeing that he will receive proof from Qatar. Today Qatar said that Hamas guarantees that, however no proof was given. France and Israel said this is not good enough and still demand more proof. In turn, Hamas news sites reported today that Hamas delegation is leaving Egypt, having concluded their meetings with Egyptian and Qatari officials regarding the ongoing negotiations on the hostage deal. The site stated that right now everyone is waiting for Israel's response and that Hamas delegates have nothing more to do there because Israel is yet to give an answer. In light of Hamas's answer to the proposed deal, Israel reportedly has decided to boycott the indirect negotiations in Egypt, so that this goes against the initial reports that Israel was still going to send delegates to the negotiations. Israel has not sent any negotiations and is officially boycotting them. The Israeli War Cabinet decided that Hamas's counteroffer is a non-starter and there's no point in negotiating it. The country would rather not engage in these negotiations, instead applying pressure on the negotiators, i.e. Egypt and Qatar, to have Hamas present a different answer, while simultaneously decreasing the military pressure on Hamas in order to facilitate them giving that different answer. The Al Arabiya News Network reported today that sources close to negotiations stated that Hamas's counteroffer put Qatar and Egypt in an embarrassing situation as the negotiations are now officially stuck, and unconfirmed reports added that the United States and Qatar are exploring expelling Hamas from Qatar. I'll add again, this is very unconfirmed at this point. There are disagreements in Israel regarding what the position of Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, is right now. According to reports yesterday, the security establishment in Israel believes that Yahya Sinwar has not spoken to the external leadership for the last 10 days, and thus he was not part of the negotiations of these deals. However, today it was reported that other sources disagree and think that Yahya Sinwar is actually the one who is controlling the shots. Other news related to the hostages, the IDF officially announced today that the hostage Yossi Sharabi was killed in the Gaza Strip as a result of IDF airstrikes. Sharabi was last seen in a video that was released by Hamas on January 15th. I will add that in the comments section below. I will put a link to the report from that day. You can see a report on that video. In that video, in short, he is seen with 3 other hostages. One of them, Noor Gamani, states that she was with Yossi Sharabi and another hostage, and that him and the other hostage were killed as a result of IDF fire. The IDF officially stated today that in its report, it concludes that they were held in a building that was next to a building that was targeted for bombing. However, the building that the hostages were held in collapsed, and Yossi Sharabi was in fact likely killed as a result of this bombing. Moving on to the fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets sent from the Gaza Strip to Israel in the last 24 hours. This is the pattern in the last week. In the last almost week and a half, there's been only 2 days in which rockets were sent. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in Beit Lahia, Hamas operatives were identified near a Hamas outpost that had been taken over previously. This is another indication that Hamas is starting to try to regain its strength and rebuild in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. IDF ground and air units attacked and killed that unit. In Gaza City, the Al-Quds hospital was reportedly damaged from fighting in the region. It sustained damage as a result of tank fire in the vicinity. Reportedly, several Palestinians were injured in the hospital. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there were substantial bombings reported in the Deir al-Balah area as well as in the Az-Zawaida areas. 15 Palestinians were reported killed. In Deir al-Balah, there's still very little to no IDF ground activity. However, the city is receiving IDF bombings almost every day. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Yunis, where the bulk of the fighting is, the IDF today entered the Al-Amal hospital in the western parts of the city. The Palestinian Red Crescent reported that dozens of people were arrested in the hospital as the IDF entered, after stating that it had intelligence confirmation that Hamas activity is being run from the hospital. The IDF stated that forces entering the hospital were instructed to avoid any possible harm to civilians, patients, medical staff, or equipment. In addition to this, in Yunis, primed rocket launchers were hidden outside a kindergarten and inside a mosque were found by the IDF in the last 24 hours and destroyed. A tunnel was also uncovered underneath a water tower. The IDF reportedly raided several different Hamas sites, uncovering substantial weaponry. 15 Hamas operatives reported killed in these different operations, as air bombings also accompanied the forces on the ground. In the most southern city of Rafah, there were reports of bombings in the city throughout the day, including the most southern areas near the Egyptian border. Several Palestinians were reported killed and more reported injured. Regarding other news from the Gaza Strip, there was a bulk of information today regarding the possibility of the IDF expanding its operations and invading the southern town of Rafah. The southern town of Rafah right now is home to the vast majority of the population of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Reportedly, upwards of 1 million refugees are within Rafah and the areas of the Al-Mawasi refugee camp above Rafah, and it is possible that many more are still fleeing there from Yunis. Today, Prime Minister Netanyahu made a public statement that he has instructed the IDF to prepare for an operation in Rafah, explicitly stating, and I quote, "You cannot achieve the goals of the war and destroy Hamas while leaving 4 Hamas battalions in Rafah. It is also clear that a strong operation in Rafah will require evacuating civilians from the fighting areas." Now, it is noteworthy that the IDF has been working on these plans to invade Rafah already for several weeks and has already approved them. Therefore, it is very possible that Prime Minister Netanyahu making these public statements is part of that attempt to apply international pressure on negotiators. One of the strategies that Israel said it was going to use is increase the pressure on negotiators to say if a deal is not reached, then the operation is going to expand, and that may be the reason that Prime Minister Netanyahu is making these statements publicly. However, amidst this, Sky News in Arabic also reported that the Israeli government has informed the United States about plans to launch an operation in Rafah very soon, stating that the operation will require evacuating civilians to ensure the security of the border with Egypt. Responding to all of this, White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre stated today that despite President Biden's comments yesterday that the IDF has gone too far, his views on the war have not changed, in fact, and that the United States wants to see Hamas destroyed, but also wants to ensure the protection of civilians in the Gaza Strip. In turn, Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas stated that an operation in Rafah will be a dangerous escalation of Israel's plans to forcibly expel Palestinians from their lands. He called upon the United States to accept responsibility and on the UN Security Council to recognize that such a move would threaten regional and world peace and security. The Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Mohammed Ashtiya also called upon the United States, the UN Security Council, and the EU to act, also asking the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, to order a stop to the war. UN Secretary General spokesperson Stefan Dodrik stated today that the population in Rafah must be protected and that the UN does not want to see forced expulsion from the area. In addition to this, amidst all the reported fears of Egypt that there will be a mass evacuation of Palestinians fleeing across the border towards Egypt, Wall Street Journal and Reuters both reported today that Egypt has sent 40 tanks and armored vehicles to the border areas with Rafah, as well as installing cameras, lookout posts, and other surveillance equipment, coming amidst other reports that Egypt is also increasing its security wall in the area and even installing landmines in order to stop the fleeing of Palestinians across the border. Regarding casualties, there were no reports of IDF soldiers killed or injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, leaving the number of IDF soldiers that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began on 227, and the number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip on 1,312 since the invasion began. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting 107 Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians that were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 27,947. 67,459 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip, but there are still several thousand buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, stated today that Israel is continuously destroying all buildings within a 1-kilometer radius of the Israeli-Gaza border, continuing its flattening operations that have been reported in the last several weeks. That is, the operations that Israel is carrying out to create this buffer zone that it reportedly intends to maintain on the Gazan side of the border, destroying any homes or buildings that may serve as lookout posts or rocket launching sites towards Israel. Regarding the entrance of humanitarian aid trucks, there were protests today in Israel that blocked the Nitzana crossing. This is organized by different organizations in Israel. Some of these are the family members of hostages. Others are more right-wing elements within Israel. All of them are calling on Israel to stop any entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip until the hostages are released. There were no reports on how many humanitarian aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, which is commonly the case when there are these protests. That does not mean the trucks did not enter. However, the numbers that did enter are usually not reported. Other news related to the humanitarian situation: Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant presented today in Israel's war cabinet a plan to bypass UNRWA and distribute aid directly in the Gaza Strip. According to the plan, humanitarian aid will enter through the Erez and the Karni crossings, that is the most northern part of the Gaza Strip and the central parts of the Gaza Strip, rather than through Rafah, which is more controlled by Hamas. Aid is going to be transferred directly in what is called back-to-back transfers to Palestinian merchants, i.e., humanitarian aid trucks will unload directly to the merchants without the assistance of aid agencies or mediators. The plan is going to begin in the coming weeks in the Zaytun area of the Gaza City in the north, which is completely engulfed by the IDF. The plan reportedly includes the possibility that if needed, in order to stop Hamas from taking over the aid from merchants, the merchants will be escorted by armed units. The plan does not specify who those armed units will be. Speculation was that possibly there will be Palestinian Authority security people, possibly Israeli security people. It is unclear. The Israeli Shabak is supposed to coordinate this, and as stated, this is supposed to start in the coming weeks. Moving on to the West Bank, there was substantial IDF activity reported in several different areas of the West Bank. These include the Nur Shams refugee camp, villages of Beit Fuka and Beit Tahta, Jericho, and El Muir village. In addition, in El Sinjal village, substantial weaponry and money was confiscated during the IDF operation, alongside arrested wanted Palestinians within those areas. In addition, in Beit, an area south of Nablus, there was an IDF operation that resulted in substantial confrontations with Palestinians. One Palestinian was reportedly killed in these confrontations, and 2 were badly injured. A total of 12 Palestinians were reported arrested in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. The IDF cites that since the war began, 3,050 Palestinians have been arrested in the West Bank. Of these, 1,350 are Hamas operatives, according to the Palestinian Prisoner Club and different sources within the Palestinian Authority. That number is much higher. In addition, the Wafa news agency reported of confrontations between Israeli settlers and Palestinians in the villages of Harbat Bani Harith as well as Bilin, as settlers positioned themselves at the entrance to the locales and confrontations erupted. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, there were substantial continued escalations of rocket fire after yesterday there were already escalations. There was a substantial barrage of 40 rockets sent from Lebanon towards the Golan Heights, targeting an IDF base in the area. Earlier barrages were also sent towards the Upper Galilee and Kiryat Shmona. El Mian, which is a Hezbollah affiliate news agency, reported that the earlier barrages included launches of over 30 rockets simultaneously. In addition, there were other rockets sent towards the Sald village in Israel, Amir, Sde Nehemiah, Shamir, Manara, and Kfar Blum. There were other missiles also sent towards the areas of Hardov and Malachia. Hezbollah stated that the attacks towards Hardov and Malachia were targeting Israeli spy equipment. A target was also intercepted above the sea in Haifa, however it was not reported what that target was. May have been a drone or something else. Regarding IDF activity, the IDF reported that it carried out attacks against Hezbollah military structures in Marun Aras, against 3 military structures in the villages of Yahmar as well as Anakora, as well as attacks against targets in Mis El Jabel, Anabatia, and Al Hayam. There was also substantial IDF retaliation reported against launching sites of Hezbollah from those different barrages, including attacks from the air and artillery fire. In addition, El Manar also reported that the IDF carried out attacks in the areas of Haruf, Jabshit, Adawir, El Wazani, and the drone attacks were used in Ita Sha'ab as well. In addition to this, amidst reports of diplomatic negotiations that are developing under the auspices of U.S. Special Envoy to the area Amos Hochstein, Hezbollah senior official Muhammad Yazbek stated today that the organization will not accept any arrangement while the fighting in Gaza continues. He stated, and I quote, "The emissaries will hear only one thing. The solution begins only with Gaza." So this comes amidst reports that Amos Hochstein was presenting to Israel a plan to push Hezbollah between 8 and 10 kilometers north of the border with Israel, and in turn the Lebanese army will deploy in that area. According to Hochstein, the Lebanese government approved this plan. However, as I stated already when it was leaked, it is highly doubtful that Hezbollah would agree to this plan. Hezbollah is now making that official. Hezbollah announced the death of 2 operatives in the last 24 hours, but the total number of operatives that Hezbollah is claiming died in the war to 186. The IDF claims that number is much higher. Moving on to the Syrian front, there were 2 different incidents reported today. Syria claimed that it foiled an attempted Israeli attack against airports near Damascus. However, despite this, the Syrian Human Rights Observatory and other organizations on the ground say that the attacks did hit the El Mazeh military airport in the area, adding that Hezbollah and pro-Iranian militias outposts are stationed there as well. Al Arabiya news agency reported that hours before the attack, an Iranian cargo plane carrying weapons from Deir Azur landed in the area, it is very likely, therefore, that that was the target of that attack. In addition, there were attacks reported in the Adimas region, west of Damascus. Saudi Al-Hadith again reported that there were 2 attacks that were carried out there against Iranian militias in the area, and the voice of the Capital Radio, which is an opposition radio in Lebanon, reported that 2 people were killed. In addition to this, the Saudi Al-Hadith reported that several commanders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard located in the Deir ez-Zor area were poisoned in the last 24 hours, and that 4 of them died as a result of this poisoning. There were no reports given regarding the nature of these poisonings or who these people were. However, that report was given amidst all of these activities that are largely attributed to Israel, and Israel occasionally does take responsibility for them. Now there's this report that commanders in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard were in fact poisoned. On some of the regional developments, there were several rounds of attacks reported in Yemen today. Local sources in Yemen stated that a United States and United Kingdom joint attack was carried out in the As-Saada region in northwestern areas of Yemen. In addition, Al-Mi'adin reported several attacks, one round in the Al-Jabana area, another near Hudaydah, and earlier in the day against the El-Khatib and At-Ta'if area in Yemen. The United States did not actually state what was attacked. Usually the United States puts out these reports later in the day, so it remains to be seen what were the targets of these various different attacks. Moving on to some of the political and general trends of the last 24 hours. For the first time in history, the Moody's credit rating lowered Israel's score from A1 to A2, with a negative projection for the future as well. The company cited that this is both as a result of the war, as well as a result of government weakness associated with the judicial overhaul that the Netanyahu government was trying to push forward for the last year. What this actually means is it will be more difficult for Israel to obtain international loans at good rates, and this may become important as the U.S. aid packages may be forestalled as a result of internal politics in the United States. It remains to be seen how this will actually influence the war. Other political news: opposition leader in Israel, Yair Lapid, is currently in France. He's meeting with different officials and is due to meet with the French Prime Minister as well, calling on them to apply financial pressure on Hamas in order to secure the release of the hostages. Other news: Saudi Arabia hosted a meeting today of foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority. They all agreed on and had a joint declaration on the need to end the war and achieve an immediate ceasefire. Other political news: the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres faced protesters in New York who were calling for the release of the hostages after being asked what he would do if he was Prime Minister of Portugal and 136 citizens were held hostage by Hamas. He asked for the megaphone and spoke to the protesters. He reportedly stated that as Prime Minister of Portugal or as Prime Minister of Israel, he would ensure that his number one priority was to release the hostages, specifically noting that both Hamas and Prime Minister Netanyahu have instead made non-productive statements in the last 24 hours. Earlier in the day, Guterres tweeted that he condemns the horrible acts of Hamas, as well as the violations of international humanitarian law in the Gaza Strip. In addition to this, still in the United Nations, the Israeli Speaker of the House, Amir Ohana, spoke at the United Nations today and seemingly was answering the statements of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who stated after October 7th that those events did not happen in a vacuum. Amir Ohana stated that they in fact did not happen in a vacuum. They happened because of hundreds of years of anti-Semitism, including in the United Nations. Ohana was due to meet Guterres after the event. However, he cancelled it after Guterres' statements about violating international law in the Gaza Strip, again adding that this cancellation does also not happen in a vacuum. Regarding the future of the Gaza Strip, the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin today spoke with Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Reports stated they discussed planning the day after the war, increasing humanitarian aid, and stabilizing the West Bank. I will add that even that statement is already changing the way things are phrased. According to that report, they discussed when they are going to plan the day after the war, not even what are those plans. When Yoav Gallant presented things to the War Cabinet in the last 24 hours, he did present what has been achieved in the war versus what is still to be achieved, and in bright red, what he said is still not accomplished is what are the plans for the day after the war, what are the plans for the power vacuum that is going to be created, and that we're already seeing that Hamas is starting to regain control whenever the IDF pulls out of a certain area. I'll add, if you have watched until now and you enjoy these videos, please do subscribe and give a like, and please send these videos to whoever you think may benefit from them. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.